Over the last 10 years, podcasts have quickly become one of the most important resources for information. But nowadays there are so many podcasts available that it is almost impossible to figure out which podcasts are best. So in this video, let me share with you the best educational podcasts that are available on Spotify right now. And some of them are still insider tips, so make sure to stick around. The first podcast on our list is the Lex Fridman Podcast. Lex Fridman is a researcher in the field of human AI and is an unlikely podcast host. He seems slightly socially awkward and talks in a very monotonous way. So why is his podcast still getting hundreds of thousands of downloads every single week, you ask? Well, first of all, Lex Fridman is what I call a deep thinker, and secondly, he has amazing guests on his show. He talked to Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, talked to Elon Musk, talked to Eric Weinstein, talked to Joe Rogan. All of those people bring amazing value to the conversation. And what I particularly enjoy in these conversations is that Lex Fridman brings zero ego into them. He is there as an observer, he genuinely wants to learn from the guest, and he knows how to steer a conversation into the right direction, but he never wants to be the center of attention. And I, for one, find that really refreshing, especially when it comes to educational podcasts. So if you are at all interested in artificial intelligence, in the future of mankind, and in all the philosophical questions that come with it, then make sure to check out Lex Fridman's podcast. The second educational podcast that I would love to recommend here is called No Stupid Questions. It is co-hosted by Stephen Dubner, who is also hosting Freakonomics Radio, and Angela Duckworth, who has written the best-selling book Grit. And as the name suggests, in this podcast the two of them ask each other questions and try to find an answer to them, which makes for a very interesting format, because one is a journalist and one is a psychologist, so they have very different backgrounds. I gotta say, I followed both of their work for years now, so when I saw that they came together to collaborate on this podcast, I was super excited. And even though the podcast is only 6 months old now, it is fair to say that it has not been a disappointment. So if you are intrigued by questions like what is the optimal way to be angry, what does it mean to be a hard worker, or does all creativity come from pain, then definitely make sure to check out No Stupid Questions. And by the way, if you are interested in getting more resources for personal development and growing as a person, make sure to subscribe to my channel. The next podcast on our list is an evergreen. It is Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Usually I try to avoid superlatives, but this guy, Dan Carlin, is possibly the most interesting and engaging speaker that I've ever listened to. I simply don't think that there's any better way to learn about history than listening to this specific podcast. And that includes books and movies and TV shows. All of those can compete with how vividly Dan Carlin explains different historic events. And he does that so thoroughly and with such attention to detail that it really doesn't matter what you think you already know about history, you will always learn a lot from his podcast episodes. I recently listened to about 20 hours that he spends talking about World War I, and it completely blew my mind. And that is coming from a German who spent years at high school learning about World War I. Of course, since Dan Carlin is so thorough in how he works, he doesn't publish that many new episodes. You have to be patient and wait about half a year until a new one comes out. But that being said, there are already a lot of episodes out there, and if you have Spotify, you do get access to the latest 10. And since one episode can easily be 4 or 5 hours, this is still a lot to go through. So if you are at all interested in history, do yourself a favor and check out Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Alrighty, we are moving quickly through this list. The next educational podcast that I can recommend is called Stuff You Should Know. Stuff You Should Know is far from being an insider tip. It gets roughly 1 million downloads every single week. And the team around it produces new episodes at an amazing speed, so right now there are more than 1,500 episodes available. And yes, all of them are on Spotify. It can seem pretty random how the topics of these different episodes are chosen, but to me that's exactly what makes this podcast so amazing to listen to. Because you never know what you're gonna learn about. One day it could be anorexia, the other day it could be beekeeping. But whatever the topic is, you are always guaranteed an excellent production value. So I believe that this might be the best podcast to listen to if you want to expand your general knowledge. Podcast number 5 on our list is a very different format. It is called Against the Rules. And it is hosted by Michael Lewis, who is the author of books like Liar's Poker or Moneyball. So if you like those books, you're definitely gonna love his podcast as well. It focuses on a rather unusual topic, which is fairness in our society. You might find episodes on topics like college admission, lending practices, or also professional sports. And what I enjoy so much about this podcast is that Michael Lewis manages to tell a story. So he starts in one of these areas and he uses it as a jumping off point, but then he goes much deeper than that. He really digs into how society works as a whole and how fairness and equality plays into that. I personally think we could all benefit from a little bit more fairness, but also from understanding better how hard some people work out there to level the playing field. And if you think that the setup of best-selling author turned podcaster is pretty cool, then you're gonna love the next podcast on our list. It is Revisionist History. This podcast is hosted by Malcolm Gladwell, who you most likely know from books like Outliers or Tipping Point. I would go as far as to say if anyone is able to be educational while at the same time telling an amazingly captivating story, it is Malcolm Gladwell. And what he does in his podcast is that he revisits the past. Different events, different people, different ideas maybe, and comments on whether or not we judge them correctly. Because sometimes we have an impression of the past and it might be flawed, it might be incorrect, and it might affect how we live in the present and how we prepare for the future. Of course, this podcast, Revisionist History, is not so much there to answer specific questions, but rather helps you to learn to ask the right questions yourself. It helps you question what you think you already know. And from my perspective, this is as educational as it gets. So to quickly summarize, the best educational podcasts available on Spotify right now are the Lex Fridman Podcast, No Stupid Questions, Hardcore History, Stuff You Should Know, Against the Rules, and Revisionist History. And naturally, this list is far from conclusive. But I made another video about podcasts on Spotify in the past that you can check out right up here. And if you have other suggestions, please let me know down in the comments below. I'm always eager to learn about other podcasts that I haven't checked out yet, and maybe other viewers of this video would be interested in your suggestions as well. Now go on, check out my suggestions, and keep learning.